day one. This is our special keynote event coming up very shortly with reporter Brandi Kruse, and we'll get to our conversation with her in just a moment. I first want to thank everyone who's registered for this two-day event and remind you that day two, of course, is coming up tomorrow, where we have a whole new set of panels and discussions. And again, it's the same drill. If you come in, you can join us for the whole morning, or you can pick and choose whichever panels that are most relevant to you or what you have time for. We'll have sessions on emergency reform, moving beyond transportation as we know it, tribal stewardship of natural resources, and a whole lot more. So make sure you're registered for tomorrow, day two of the Solution Summit. Look for your Zoom link being sent to you. It'll be sent to your inbox and watch for that. Right now, though, our development director, Sydney Jansen, is going to join us to talk a little bit more about how you can support Washington Policy Center. Sydney.
Thank you, Dave. I just wanted to come on and thank you all for being here today. As Dave mentioned, I'm the development director at Washington Policy Center, and we just closed out a very successful year in terms of fundraising. We hit 5 million for the first time, which is really exciting. And that's thanks to all of you. Thank you for your support, your loyalty. It's been an interesting couple of years with COVID, but all of you have stayed very loyal to WPC. And I just want to thank you. All of this information that you're hearing today and tomorrow, everything that our researchers are doing is only thanks and only possible because of our supporters. So thank you very much. If you are interested in getting more involved or maybe joining, maybe this is your first event, I encourage you to support WPC. You can join today. There'll be a link in the chat. You can join for as little as $50 to get our basic membership. And that's an annual membership. And that's also 100% tax deductible. So consider giving to WPC today, whether it be your first time or an additional contribution for the year. Also, if you're interested in talking more about your support or getting more involved, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to talk to you about your options for support and membership. There's a lot we have going on, a lot we have planned for 2022, of course, starting out with the legislative session. So just wanted to connect with you all and say thank you. My contact information will also be in the chat. So reach out if you have any questions or want to discuss your support further. But thank you all for being here, and thanks for your support. And I will pass it back to you, Dave.
Thanks, Sydney. I appreciate it. I'm very excited about this next topic, this next panelist. It was several years ago, I was sitting at my desk doing a morning show for morning radio, and in walked a new employee, fresh from college, a young woman by the name of Brandi Kruse. And she walked in and instantly she had a kind of charisma and presence that you rarely see in media. And she proved time and again over the weeks and months and years ahead to have a special courage, an inquisitiveness that is rare, and an objective, an ability to see things objectively and to ask tough questions for all comers, and a willingness to challenge the status quo in an area that tends to be a little soft pedaling in many ways. And I was very pleased that she sat across the desk from me. I was not the only one that saw how talented she was, although not every manager saw it that way, and she had to fight through some of that as well. And she did. And she hosted her own program for some time that many of us were fans of on Q13. And then she recently broke away to host Undivided on her own. And you can see the link to that, subscribe for yourself via our resources page at washingtonpolicy.org. The link is at the bottom of the page there, so you can subscribe to her new program. But she had moxie, and she continues to show that in her interviews and her willingness to confront, whether it's a protester or a power broker in Washington State. She'll ask any question and face off the crowds. And now she's here to tell us about her new endeavors and her views on media. Brandi, my friend, welcome.
Well, that is a nice introduction. Dave, before you go, you went, that beard is something to behold. It's really filling in there. It looks good.
Well, I was going for Santa for my kids, and I filled it out, but never got the costume out this year. So I just went for the full physical look.
Oh, I like it. And thank you for those kind words. And Dave's been great. He's been a friend for some years now and always very supportive of everything that I've been doing. Welcome to my house in North Bend. I hope you guys dug out of the snow okay. My car is currently high centered on some snow at the end of our driveway. So that's going to be my adventure once I get off with all of you, is shoveling that out. Also, just a note, there will be dogs today somewhere. So just, they're very cute and they'd like to join us. So when you see them, just know I've pre-warned you about that. I'm very excited to be chatting with you. You know, one of the things that I was most excited for when I decided to quit my job and go out on an independent basis is being able to speak with organizations like the Washington Policy Center, to be able to talk about policy and frankly, to give my opinions on policy and to be a little more free to do that. These are things that I wasn't able to do for understandable reasons when I was working in a corporate media environment. And it's something that I've got a few events coming up that I just have really already enjoyed in the last 2 months. And so I look forward to doing much more of this. I know that there's going to be a little bit of intrigue about why I quit my job. I get emails constantly about it. I'll touch on that a little bit. But I really want to talk about solutions, which is why we're all here. I want to talk about the state of the press as I see it. My view of the press certainly is just that. It's my view. It's my opinion. I know there are probably a lot of different ones out there, but I'll share with you what I think about where we find ourselves. And really, I'm really excited to take questions from all of you. So I'll try to leave as much time as possible to answer any and all questions that you have to the best of my ability. First, for those who don't know me, I'm sure there's many on this call. My name is Brandi Kruse. I've been a journalist in the Seattle area for about 12 years now, as Dave said. My first job was at Kyra Radio, the CBS radio affiliate in Seattle, when I was, I think, 21. So very naive, very blonde, if I recall. And was covering mostly crime and justice and having a really good time doing it. I ended up a few years later just going right across the lake to Fox 13, my first job in TV. I'd never really wanted to be on TV, really loved radio. I met with a news director. She's like, we'll teach you television. They just put more makeup on me, cut my hair, and that was it. And then I was on TV. That was really the only difference. So I was at Fox 13. Well, it's now Fox 13. It was Q13 for 7 years, a little more than 7 years before I decided to walk away. I transitioned into covering politics about the same time that politics started to consume all of our lives. And that was during the 2016 presidential election. At the time, I think I was maybe 25. And I went into my boss's office, still pretty new to TV, and I told her, hey, I really want to do a weekly segment on bridging political divides. I felt like many of us did, the growing divides in our state, in politics, on every level because of what was happening in the national presidential campaign. And so she kind of said, okay, we'll let you do that, but you can just post it on your Facebook page. So she gave me the green light, but it was this little segment called The Divide that just existed on my Facebook page in my own little world. After a few weeks, they put it on TV. And then in a few years, we debuted The Divide as a Sunday morning political program that aired before Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace. And I was really proud of the show because I believed in the mission. And the mission, being to bridge political divides, but also to try to bring common sense back in the conversation. I really felt like there wasn't anything out there like it. You have the national political talk shows and everyone can find one that suits their political opinion. But I really felt like The Divide, you were going to like it 50% of the time and you were going to hate it 50% of the time if you were a political partisan. And so, The Divide, it was funny because we launched that show thinking it would be sort of this, kumbaya, bring people together, but it was very much the opposite. It turned out to be very divisive because one of the things I discovered is, for instance, Democrats, the only thing they hate more than Republicans is a moderate. And for some Republicans, the only thing they hate more than a Democrat is a moderate. And so moderate voices was something that turned out to be a little controversial, but I enjoyed every minute of it. The concept for me in The Divide, and I'll transition into what I've segued that into. The concept for me when I went about that show every week was simple. It was that these divisive debates didn't have to be black and white, that there could be a gray area, and there had to be a gray area to have productive conversations. For instance, We could celebrate law enforcement. We could appreciate and understand the critical role that they play in our society, the very difficult work that they do across the state every single day. But we could also expect a lot from them. We could talk about ways to improve their training, ways to hold bad officers accountable, and that we could have those conversations in the same breath. On homelessness, I've talked publicly a lot about the fact that my father died homeless. He died homeless, drug addicted, an alcoholic in a cheap motel room, and it was a result of his mental illness. It was funny because I would push for accountability on homelessness. And in Seattle, I'd get painted as right wing for doing that when I knew, my background with that issue and the profound sympathy I have and care and concern for those who are living on our streets. So when I talk about homelessness and say, this isn't a black and white conversation, it's true that I think we all have care and concern for the people living on our streets. But, if we're being realistic, we also understand that we don't want homeless camps in the back of schools. We don't want homeless camps in parks and on sidewalks. And so what I really found was lacking in the media, the mainstream media, and in the public discourse was this ability to talk about things with nuance and to, agree on, a set of facts, like we care about people on the streets, without arguing about whether or not, people had sympathy for those living on the streets, and we can still talk about solutions to those issues. So that was really the spirit of the divide. I loved it. I thought it was making a difference. All I'll really say, unless you guys want to ask me about it, about my departure from Q13, it was a couple reasons. First of all, the pandemic. I was incredibly disappointed with the media's, and still am, the media's coverage of the pandemic. To me, the pandemic, I don't want to say the word opportunity, but I don't believe, at least in my lifetime, that there's been a more critical time for the media. Our job is to hold the government accountable. And there has never been a time in my lifetime where the government is exerting such profound power over people's lives. Not only, the federal government, but the state government, all the way down to municipalities. And I thought this is the moment for a free press to stand up and to really hold elected leaders to account. And I've seen very little of that, by and large, from the mainstream media. I think it's because, and we all know, the mainstream media tends to lean left. I think that's just by virtue of the type of people who pursue those jobs. And so I think you had a media core that really believed in, they wanted to get vaccines themselves. They believed in social distancing and all these things, which is fine, but it's still their job to question mandates like that coming down from the governor, and to question, there's my dogs who joined the call. Hello, there's nobody here. Okay. I did warn you. There's nobody here but a squirrel. Hold on a second.
Sounds like some of the protesters that you face off with.
I'm sorry, I am at home.
Except they're more enthusiastic.
But it really was our dog, and my dogs can join me. It really was our responsibility to question the governor. It didn't matter how we felt about vaccine mandates. And I always, when I talk about this, I make sure to mention that I have a vaccine. I got, I guess 2 doses. I haven't got my booster yet, but I've been vaccinated since the first opportunity. But that didn't mean that I wasn't going to question vaccine mandates put down by the governor and mandates put down by the mayor that had a profound impact on public safety. So one of my reasons for leaving Fox 13 had to do with my disappointment in the product that we were putting out, and not just us, but mainstream media as a whole. I really felt like they weren't living up to their obligation to people, and was disappointed in it, frankly. But the other reason was just a behind the scenes intrigue. We got bought by Fox at the beginning of the pandemic. They brought in their own management at the end of this past summer. And I don't believe that there was an interest in pursuing the divide as it was. And for me, the show had been carefully thought out. It had a purpose. It had an intent. And if it wasn't going to move forward in that form, I had no interest in moving forward with it. And so I decided that I was going to take it on my own. And so that's where I am today. Is it's just a slight change in the name. I am now the host of Undivided, which is a digital show that airs on YouTube on Sundays. It's also a twice weekly podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. So that's my pitch. And the mission is the same, but I will say my tactics have changed a little bit. one of the things that I've realized in doing The Divide and in doing this kind of work as a moderate and as an independent is there are people who don't want a return to common sense. They don't want to have reasoned debate and dialogue. And what I've realized is that I kind of need to fight fire with fire. And so I've labeled Undivided as political coverage for the anti-fringe, which is what I consider myself. If there were an anti-fringe party, that's the party that I would belong to. And so really Undivided is about, yes, lifting up moderate voices, but it's also about rejecting fringe ideologies. The fringe ideologies in Seattle, the fringe ideologies that led to the insurrection about a year ago today at our nation's capital. And I do that forcefully, and I do it forcefully for a reason, because those people whose ideologies I'm rejecting in my commentaries and in my coverage are people who I do not believe want to have a reasoned debate with anyone on the other side. I got a lot of questions early on when I launched Undivided about what do you consider fringe? Because fringe can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And my definition of fringe is pretty simple. It's someone who supports an idea without any care or concern for the consequences. As an example, police defunding. I believe that you can support police defunding without being fringe, in my perspective, and I'm going to explain that. Some of you might know State Senator Joe Wynn. He is one of the most progressive members of the State House in Olympia in the Senate, and he represents an area south of Seattle that is very progressive as well. Senator Wynn believes in defunding the police to a certain extent, but what I'll say about him is I've had him on many times. He and I have had many wonderful, productive conversations where he's sharing his point of view and he's listening to other points of view. He lives, I believe, in West Seattle, and he has Seattle police officers as neighbors. And he has had many conversations with them as well about his perspective, about their perspective, and trying to understand, how they can reconcile those two things. So someone like State Senator Joe Wynn, I don't consider him fringe. I consider him to have a different point of view, but he's willing to listen to other people. It is when you are unwilling to listen to the possible consequences of a policy like defunding the police that I consider you unreasonable and I consider you fringe, and where I will be more aggressive in my dealings with you. So that's about where I am. I've heard another podcaster I respect refer to the alt middle. I like that, Lori. Lori said I could call myself the alt middle as opposed to anti-fringe. I like that. I like alt middle. I might take that. So that's where I'm at, journalistically right now. And that is what my mission is. And in full disclosure, I do give my opinion. I have a commentary that I do every single week. And it's, I'm like, less, I don't have a filter as much now that I don't have a company I work for, which has been really enjoyable. And I think, being able to really speak my mind on some of these key issues has been really fun. And there are certainly a lot of other people who have a different perspective of what I do and of what the media landscape is right now. But, that's where I'm at. As far as the media, you guys might have realized that there's a lot of people leaving mainstream media. There's a lot of people walking away from television newsrooms. And that's for a variety of reasons. I think part of it is the pandemic forced everyone to reevaluate their career choices and whether they were in the right career for them. But also, newsrooms, their budgets are getting smaller. More and more people are cutting traditional television. As a result, ad revenues are down, and people are just expected to do more and more. And newsrooms are incredibly toxic, stressful environments to work in. And I think that people are starting to realize that, and to realize that if they're really passionate about the news, that there are other ways to deliver it. I really believe that what we're doing with Undivided is going to be sort of more and more common as time goes on. And I wanted to get out in front of that. And I have big, bold vision for Undivided and what it can become in the next 18 months, and have been so appreciative of everyone who's supported that effort and become a subscriber. So now that I've talked a little bit about the press, I want to talk about solutions, because I believe that's why we're all here. And how, some of my disappointment in the mainstream media factors into some of the problems that we're dealing with. As an example of solutions, or I'm going to call it a non-solution, I want to talk a little bit about House Bill 1692, I believe is the bill. Is it 1692? Yes, 1692. If you guys follow me, I have been talking about this for several weeks now. The day before Christmas Eve, I had a viewer who alerted me to a pre-filed bill called House Bill 1692. And it was proposed by Democratic Representative Tara Simmons and Democratic Representative David Hackney. Tara Simmons is out of Bremerton. David Hackney represents part of South Seattle, Kent, Renton, that area, an area that's been having a profound problem with gun violence. Well, the bill they introduced would eliminate, well, it basically would ease penalties for drive-by shooters who kill someone. So what it would do is remove drive-by shooting from the list of aggravating factors for murder in the first degree. So if you're convicted of aggravated first-degree murder in the state right now, the only possible punishment is life in prison without the possibility of parole. So right now in our state, if you shoot someone in a drive-by and they die, and you're charged with aggravated first-degree murder, you're going to prison for life. So what this bill would do is eliminate that. It would ease punishments for drive-by shooters who kill, and it would give judges and prosecutors more discretion in deciding how long that person should spend in prison. And the bill said that it was doing this in the name of racial equity, which I guess they're making the assumption that most people who commit drive-bys are Black. And I've had people say, well, that sounds racist, which it does. And I haven't looked at the numbers of suspects who commit drive-by shootings. But when we talk about solutions, this bill bothered me deeply. And I have made no bones about the fact that I'm opposed to it and have spent much of the last 2 weeks trying to get word out about this bill and trying to talk to people who have been impacted. I cannot, for the life of me, wrap my mind around why this is something that lawmakers would be prioritizing their time on. We have seen over the past year and a half dramatic rise in shootings and homicides, and nowhere more so than in the district of Democratic Representative David Hackney. And so for them to be prioritizing a piece of legislation that isn't aimed at any solution to the crisis of gun and gang violence that we see on our streets, for them to be prioritizing something that's only purpose is to make sure that violent criminals don't spend that much time in prison was beyond, frankly, my comprehension. What's also beyond my comprehension is the fact that so few mainstream media outlets have picked up on this story. I broke this story on Christmas Eve, and I think the only people who really spent any time covering it are conservative media outlets, Dory Monson, Jason Rantz, Ari Hoffman. And I was really, really taken aback by that. And I think it shows a failure of the mainstream media to look at this and to say, wait, aren't we dealing with an increase in gang violence right now? Why would this be the proposal? Why wouldn't they be proposing solutions like investing in communities of color, investing in programs that help keep kids out of gangs? What they're covering with this bill is a symptom of a problem, not a solution to a problem. And so I've had this twofold frustration this week with the media for failing to cover it, although I will give credit to the Seattle Times for allowing me to publish an op-ed on it. And then frustration with the sponsors of the bill. Not only have they not walked back from it, but actually an additional Democrat has signed on to it, which was fascinating to me given some of the blowback. Just to give you some background on House Bill 1692 and why I think it's just so ill-advised, I got a chance to chat with the brother of a 19-year-old named Corey Pittman, who was shot and killed in a drive-by shooting on Tacoma's Hilltop back in 1997. The brother's name is Damian Pittman. Damian's Black. His brother Corey was Black. His brother Corey was a student at the time at Alabama State University. He wanted to be a civil rights attorney. He was doing wonderful things with his life when he was shot dead with a MAC-90 rifle in the hands of a blood gang member. What I thought was interesting about House Bill 1692 was that nowhere in the statement we got from the bill's sponsor did they mention Corey Pittman. You know who they mentioned? They mentioned Kamonte Carter, the gang member who killed Corey Pittman. They mentioned how Kamonte Carter had turned his life around in prison, how he was helping other prison inmates get college credit. They mentioned that they thought that he ought to get out of prison. but nowhere did they mention the life that Corey Pittman could have led if it wasn't snuffed out. And I think that that's where we have to get back to common sense and having common sense conversations about actual solutions. You know, there were a lot of Republicans who have come out in opposition to House Bill 1692. My fear is that many of them simply see it as an opportunity to point out the misguided priorities of Democrats because we're heading into an election year. And I understand that this is a bit of red meat for Republicans, but what I would really like to see Republicans do as it pertains to House Bill 1692 is I would like to see them propose solutions, alternative solutions. I would like to see them propose solutions that would prevent kids from falling into the gang life. As I said at the end of my show this week, none of us want to be arguing about how long someone should spend in prison. We should spend our time debating how to keep people out of prison to begin with. And that's what I mean by common sense solutions and common sense conversations. One more thing I want to touch on before I take questions is emergency powers reform. I know you guys are going to discuss. I could touch on long-term care tax. I hope some of you asked me about that because what a disaster that is. But I want to talk about emergency powers reform and why I'm in favor of that, why it's something that I covered and have covered so extensively. You know, there are, I believe, 104 maybe lawmakers, state lawmakers in our state between the House and the Senate. And, you know, if I could see you guys right now, I wish I could see you. I would ask you, let's say Dave, pop back on for me as I wrap up here. We'll play this out with you. Maybe you're good at math. I don't know. All right, Dave, there's how many people on this call? 100. Are you good at math, Dave?
I am with my phone because I've got a wonderful calculator.
No phone. So Dave, pretend I'm an evil mastermind, which isn't too far from the truth, to be honest. And I am going to present you with a complicated piece of arithmetic. Now, if you can solve it, you get to live. If you can't, you get to die. Now, I tell you, Dave, you can either choose to solve it by yourself, or the 100 or so people on this call can all come together and try to solve that equation with you. Which would you choose?
And it would depend on the equation, I think. I'd probably take a gander at it myself, take a look, and then if I had any doubts, I'd bring everybody in.
Any doubts?
Yeah.
I look at that as what Governor Jay Inslee has done with the pandemic. I think most people would say, yeah, if I didn't think I could solve the equation, I would probably ask for help if my life was on the line. You know, Governor Jay Inslee has 100 plus people in Olympia who have been sent there from all over the state. They are business owners. They are teachers. They come from a variety of walks of life and represent a variety of different communities. I have had the pleasure of interviewing many of them, and they are all very, very smart. And for Governor Jay Inslee to feel as if he wants to deal with a once-in-a-century problem by himself is also beyond my comprehension. And it's truly what he has been doing. I do understand that he's been talking to health experts and he has people in his corner. But, you know, when you're in charge, if you have the luxury of having 100 people who are eager to have their input, who are eager to help you, who are eager to bring solutions to the table, I can't understand the desire to turn them away. And I think that there should be more of a concern from the mainstream media about what it really means to remain in a state of emergency and to have such profound power in the hands of one person for the better part of 2 years. And so I'm a big fan of emergency powers reform. Frankly, part of it is selfish for me as a journalist. I would like to see where every single state lawmaker lands on some of the mandates that the governor has put down. I'd really like to see them vote on it. But in summarizing, and again, you guys can really ask me anything. You know, my goal with Undivided is to try to inject some common sense back into the conversations that we're having about crises that have worsened in this state over a decade. I care deeply about this state. I care deeply about the city of Seattle. I am very hard on the city of Seattle, but it's because I see its potential and I want it to live up to its full potential. And I think that that's the mindset that we should all be operating under, which is we all want the same things. And we have to work together and have honest, open dialogue in order to achieve those ends. And, as long as I get the pleasure and privilege of doing this job and having a platform, I'm going to use it to try to hold elected leaders accountable for bad ideas or no ideas. And I find a lot of joy in doing it. So with that, I would love to take your questions.
That's great, Brandi. Thanks. Whenever I'm considering putting my life in the hands of a panel, I always want to know how many of them want me dead first.
I think you're in good company here.
Because you never know with me. There's a question here that we have from Tim, who says he's a business executive. He thinks he's a good judge of talent. He first heard 21-year-old Brandi on Cairo and recognized her talent right away. It's been fun to watch your career progress, and he's been interested in the launch of Undivided, not just because he loves your radical moderate stances, but he's also interested in the business of striking out on your own in media. How do you see your media career evolving over the next decade? Do you see yourself steering clear of corporate media, including evolving podcast networks? And do you have a need for investment beyond your subscriber base? That's my favorite part of the question because
well, if you're going to let me use the next half hour to beg for money, I'd
exactly. It's like,
do that.
I have no interest whatsoever in added support for my independent venture. That'd be breaking news.
My plan for Undivided for the next 18 months, which I've written out and I'm trying to follow, is I want to turn it into an hour-long daily show with an army of independent journalists who are doing exceptional work. That's a lofty goal. I think it's a goal that's doable in the next 18 months. So right now I'm really dedicated to Undivided because I believe in the mission. It's not about money. It's not about anything else. I believe in the mission and I want to try to steer this state back to the middle. So that's where my focus is right now. I am going to start to cover national topics a little bit more because I do believe that there is a growing national audience for content that is not only in the middle, but is common sense. You look at the Barry Weisses of the world, who's wonderful, former New York Times, started the Honestly podcast. She was an inspiration for me getting out on my own. I do believe that there is a shift happening. I think the younger generation is also tired of the right and the left bickering. And so I do think that you're going to see this real demand for the type of the content that we're putting out there at Undivided. So for instance, I had interviewed Maryland Governor Larry Hogan while he was in town the other week and loved doing that. So there will be a push to do a little bit more national stuff. I'll be traveling around the country a little bit, but always things that are relevant to my core audience here. Not ruling out moving back to mainstream media at some point. I have no plans for that right now. But one of the things that I want to do with this, and one of a mission of mine, is to make this so popular that the mainstream media has to fix itself and that they have to change how they're covering important issues and that they have to stop being so biased because they realize that it's not what people want anymore. So I do have a lot of hopes for the mainstream media that it can steer back in the right direction. And if that's the case down the road, I absolutely would not rule out returning to that environment. But right now, as I said when I left, I don't believe that I can work for the people at the same time I'm working for a corporation. That's how I felt when I left. It's how I feel now.
Do you think that the Greater Puget Sound media has a problem asking tough questions of left-wing leadership?
Yes.
And
yes,
if so, why? What do you see as the root cause of that problem?
I mean, I think there are a number of them. I can say that I had this conversation with Dow Constantine when he was running for re-election. Dow and I have kind of this relationship a tad, and he and I met. This is when I was still with Fox 13. We had a nice interview set up out on the beach in West Seattle where he lives. And he kind of had a joke for me that I was mean to him at the beginning before we started. And I told him, I said, Dow, I'm not mean to you. The other reporters are just too easy on you. And he said, you know what? That's probably true. And, for me, I never want to butt heads. I never go into an interview wanting to have a confrontational interview with anyone. The goal is always, let's go in, I'll ask the pertinent questions, they'll answer them, and we can move on with our lives. And that's just not always how it goes. I think there's a couple reasons why some in the media, and I don't think all, I think there are some good journalists still in Seattle TV who are asking hard questions. One of it is there's always a concern about access. If this is someone I'm interviewing frequently and I'm asking them too hard of questions this time around, are they going to do an interview with me again? I think there's always that in the back of the mind with a journalist. Two, again, the media leans left. We know this. There's been national studies on that. So I think that when you're approaching a politician that's more of your political persuasion, it's hard inherently for you to muster the kind of questions that people who aren't of your political persuasion might want you to ask. And then two, there's just a lot of young people. Newsrooms are trying to pay people less and less. I think King 5, they're starting reporters off at like 60 grand a year, and some of them are very young. And you're just not going to get an experienced seasoned journalist to accept that job for that kind of money. And I think when you're younger and less confident in your knowledge of the topics going into an interview, I think that leads to softball interviews as well. Yeah.
Do you think that you mentioned that you have an opinion? In my experience, everybody in journalism has an opinion, whether they want to share it or not. There was a conversation I had with Britt Hume back when he was with ABC and with Eleanor Clift way back in the day. And they all agreed that there was a left-wing bias. Hume's answer to that was to acknowledge the bias and move on, to know, hey, I tend to lean to the right. So if I'm ignoring a question that makes my side look bad, I have a problem. Mm-hmm. Whereas Clift's approach was, yes, there's a bias, but no, it's not a problem. And nobody's that these views are not being permeated through the media. Do you think Hume's kind of approach would be better for most of your colleagues to just acknowledge, hey, I have these opinions, but I'm not going to prevent the information that conflicts with that or challenges that from getting to you?
Yeah. So yes, but not, I guess, in the same vein, if he's acknowledging that bias publicly, I don't think that's productive for journalists. There's a reason, why I never came out and talked about my political affiliations, even though I don't have one, which was coming out of the political closet was very easy for me because I don't subscribe to either party. But, I think one of the things I've told young journalists when I speak to young journalists is that every day when you walk in the door and you get your assignment, you have to ask yourself how you feel about the story, because every reporter has an opinion about the story they're covering that day, unless it's like a dumpster fire or something. You always have an opinion about it. And I told them you have to ask yourself what your opinion is, what your bias is, and then keep that in mind as you go about reporting on the story. And so I think it's contingent on each individual journalist to understand going into a situation, how do I feel about this? How do I feel about vaccine mandates, for instance? And then how is that reflective in the questions that I'm answering or in the storylines that I'm pursuing? And I just don't know that there's enough of it. What I tend to see in newsrooms is for people to act as if they don't have an opinion about it. We always have conversations in newsrooms, for them to act like they don't have an opinion about it and they're just covering it completely fairly, which we all know isn't the case. So I think when you don't acknowledge to yourself and have an internal dialogue about how you feel about a story, I think that's when your stories start to reflect that bias even more.
Question from Daniel, since you brought it up. What do you think of the state vaccine mandates given Omicron and the impacts on the state workforce? And
is that the Daniel that tipped me off to House Bill 1692? I think it was. Thank you, Daniel. An astute man there. Tipped me off to that the day before New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve. I'm opposed to the mandates. I'll be honest. I don't think this is the first time I've said that, but I think some of my commentaries will have reflected that. And look, and we're seeing the reason why right now. We were in the summer still in a rapidly changing pandemic. I believe the pandemic is real. I don't believe it's a plandemic. I believe people are getting sick. I believe it's serious. I have the vaccine. But at the same time, we knew during the summer months how rapidly the situation was changing and how there were new variants coming on board, how there was going to be questions about whether those variants would be able to be fought with the current vaccines that we have. And so now look at what you're seeing. In Seattle this summer, more people were shot and killed than died of COVID-19. It's an issue I brought up with Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkan many times, asking her why she would fire Seattle police officers who didn't have a vaccine when more people had been shot and killed in her city than had died of COVID-19 in the previous 4 months. To me, it was nonsensical, especially at a time of record low police staffing. And so now what are you seeing? 3 days ago, 69 Seattle police officers were out sick with COVID, 69 in a force that's already decimated. And at the same time, they fired officers over the mandate, and they're preparing still to fire officers who are awaiting results of exemption requests. And to me, you have these two issues that you're balancing. You have the issue of public safety, which we know is very real. We can count the bodies quite literally. And then you have the issue of public health, which is serious, which is important. But they prioritized one over the other, where I think that there was a million ways they could have prioritized both of them. So you now see officers who are fully vaccinated. I talked to a police detective who's triple vaxxed and is out sick with COVID. And so now you have the situation where the people who you allowed to keep their jobs, they're still able to spread Omicron to others. And now you've fired officers who could have easily taken a test every day when they came in the door. So that's what my opposition is about. It was about the fact that, a year from when the governor put the mandate down, things could be entirely different. And we're already seeing that right now.
Next question from Steve. The state, King County, and Seattle have all been driven by one party for a very long time. Most of us look at issues like crime and homelessness, which have gotten worse. Why do you think others in the media seem so reluctant to call that out? Thanks for your great work. I'll add to this question a variant of it, which is the media seems to frequently place things in a Republican versus Democrat or Democrat versus Republican lens, even when, no offense to the Republicans, but they've been out of the game for 40 years in the executive office, and
Yeah.
The same in Seattle. And yet even the politicians like Governor Inslee will say, it's the Republicans' fault from time to time. And that seems to it's allowed because it's the left versus right debate, even though it doesn't apply. Why is that happening? Why does the media allow that?
It's nonsensical. I got into this Twitter battle royale, I want to say a year and a half ago, with my colleagues in the press in Seattle, where they all ganged up on me because I was saying something about them that they probably didn't want to hear. I think my tweet was, if you're a reporter in a city with Democratic rule and you're doing more stories on Republicans than Democrats, you're not doing your job. And people always think, I get called right wing all the time, which I think is hilarious. But I think I also got called Seattle's Ann Coulter, which was even better. What I have said is that, people think, oh, she's not a Democrat because she's so hard on Democrats. And my retort to that is, who else would I be hard on? Who else should I be using my power as a journalist to be hard on? There are no Republicans. I mean, there are a few, but if we're being honest with ourselves, there are none in positions where they're really dramatically influencing policy. And so when you see a journalist who is doing more stories on Republicans, who's blaming Republicans for any of the crises that we have in our state, that's a journalist that's showing their bias. You look at homelessness, you look at drug abuse, you look at the deteriorating state of our mental health system. Who has been in power for decades in our state? It's Democrats. And besides what I've been saying all along, that, the media tends to skew left, I don't know how to account for the fact that the press has not been harder on them. And this is the other big thing and why I left mainstream media. I don't believe as a press corps that we have to passively cover these things. I believe that we should be aggressive in pointing out the failures of leadership, obvious failures. You cannot say there's been any success on homelessness, any success on mental health, any success on the drug crisis, quite the opposite. So you have the media sort of passively covering these things where we're the only people with voices powerful enough to point out these failures, and we're not doing it. Inslee on homelessness, I'll just make an aside. He came out with this grand plan, I think what he called the most ambitious plan to fund homelessness, $800 million. And then he bragged about the fact that it wasn't the only investment that he's made as governor to fight the homeless crisis. And my jaw dropped because I thought, why would you brag about spending hundreds of millions of dollars for a crisis that has gotten worse? I would never brag about that. I would try to hide it as best I could. And so, this is the bottom line. The media is, I believe, equally to blame for the state of Seattle, for the state of the state, for the state of the homeless crisis, for the state of the drug crisis, for the state of the mental health crisis. I believe that the media bears an equal amount of responsibility because they didn't live up to their end of the deal to hold elected leaders accountable over the past decade plus for crises that were on a downward spiral.
Next question from Sue. Peacemaking is desirable, but do you see a danger remaining moderate merely to avoid being labeled an extremist? What's the position of a moderate in the face of government extremism?
Can you read that for me again? What was the first part of that?
Sure. This is a question from Sue. Let me scroll back down to her question. Let's see here.
Sorry,
Peacemaking, it's all right.
sorry.
Peacemaking is desirable, but do you see a danger remaining moderate merely to avoid being labeled an extremist?
Mhm.
What is the position of a moderate in the face of government extremism? I take it like you described, where if you have if you have a public safety concern and more people are dying of being murdered by firearms in Seattle and criminal violence than are dying of COVID, and yet you're firing police officers for not being vaccinated. There seems to be an ideological zealotry going on in policy when it comes to public health. And that's the extremism. So what's the position of the moderate there?
Sure. Let me be clear about something. As a moderate, I still have strong opinions about policy. And I believe that moderates can and do have strong opinion about policy. People who are politically homeless, can and do have strong opinions about policy. To me, being a moderate isn't being a fence walker. It's sometimes I tumble on the right side of the fence and sometimes I tumble on the left. And, it all comes back to me to common sense. I'm a moderate because I believe sometimes that the parties are too quick to judge affiliations before they judge actions. And it bothers me. To me, I have one moral compass. I point it north and I stay the course. And I don't care what party you belong to. Is your idea or is your action something I agree with? That's all I care about at the end of the day, full stop. And so when it comes to, quote unquote, government extremism, which you talk about mandates, firing police officers, leaving Snoqualmie Pass, which is 6 miles away from me, in a state of, constant closure because we don't have anybody to clear the roadways. I think as moderates, you can still, it's not about kumbaya all the time. I think you can still point out extremism on both sides. I think you can point that out when it comes to, and I might anger some people, but when it comes to the former president, who I'm not a fan of, or when it comes to, Jay Inslee and dictating from the mount. So I don't believe that moderacy precludes you from calling out extreme or bad policies from the government.
Next question's from Gerald. That's just so unusual, I can't help but ask it. Do you see anything therapeutic in the political divide as a form of dialectic behavioral therapy?
Therapeutic? Oh,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it helps me stay employed, I guess. No, I don't see anything therapeutic in it. Sometimes I get very annoyed.
Next question. Do we all want the same things? It seems to me there's a section of the population that just wants complete change, to turn things upside down.
Yeah. I think by and large, we all in our core want the same thing. We want to be able to be safe, to be able to make enough money to take care of our families. And we all just want to, live in or work in jobs that don't make us miserable and have some free time to enjoy life. I mean, and to pet my dogs. That's what I want. I think most people want those things as well. I think we have different ways of getting there. House Bill 1692 is an example of that. Tara Simmons wants criminal justice reform. She wants the country to stop sending people to prison for the rest of their lives. She's a former inmate. I understand where she's coming from. I have a family member who spent 3 years incarcerated at Monroe State Correctional Facility. I want the same thing as well. I don't want people to go to prison for extended periods of time, but I think that the way to address those things is on the front end. I don't believe it's on the back end. And so, it's a different way of getting at the heart of the same problem. And I think that if we could talk to each other, for instance, Republicans being opposed to House Bill 1692, I really want to see them aggressively work with the sponsors to come up with different ideas. I don't just want to see them putting out statements about how irresponsible the bill is. I think that's a waste. I want to see them come out with ideas of their own that can help Tara Simmons achieve what she's trying to achieve, which is to keep people out of prison and to help them lead productive lives.
Next question from Beth. How do you suggest getting Washington State elected majority leaders to govern in a way that treats the minority, both the leaders and the voters, with respect and consideration?
Well, I just, before I hopped on with you guys, I was down with Julie Anderson in Tacoma, sitting down to do an interview to talk about her bid for Secretary of State. I love the idea of more people pursuing office as nonpartisans. I think that there is a an optics to that that's really nice. But I also think that there's a practicality to that that's really nice as well, which is, she is certainly not going to get that job with any help from the governor, since he's already picked the heir apparent. And so I think that it helps her not be beholden to him either. As for how we get the majority to listen to the minority, I don't know the answer to that. When I look at how Governor Inslee has talked about people who don't have the vaccine, comparing them to domestic terrorists. When I heard when he was in Spokane, how he talked about, if you're a 40-year-old Trump supporter, you're killing, children. I don't think that you can undo that. I don't think you can change that kind of behavior. And it's disappointing. I am a firm believer in the power of divided government. And I think that divided government really forces both parties to care about each other's constituents. So I am fingers crossed for divided government, because I think that would be really helpful in making sure that everyone on both sides is understanding, the other point of view and what they're trying to do for their constituents.
Richard wants to know, how would you explain a 54% voter turnout for the SWAT recall?
I can't. I think I did a commentary on, I cannot. We live in all of us. We live in a different bubble. We live in a bubble that is very heavy, on politics and news, and we soak in it. I take a bath in politics every morning. People just don't, and I hate to say that, but there's a lot of people who just don't care. And either they're working, 2 jobs or whatever it is, or they've got 4 kids and they've got competing priorities, and they're not marinating in it like we are. And I can only imagine that that's what's going on. I have done stories on SWAT like every month for 7 years, and that's just not the life that other people are living. I guess that's the only assumption that I can make, is we are over, the media is covering her more than her constituents are thinking about her. And maybe that's a disconnect. I don't know.
In the CHOP zone in Seattle, when, protesters took over, people following your career would have seen you followed for blocks and blocks and harassed and pushed around, and your camera crew pushed around until you had to escape through a fire department at one point. That kind of behavior toward journalists, it's not just you. There's others there as well. Anybody carrying a camera can be in danger from some of these individuals. One, how do you see that experience impacting your career and also other journalists as they see that? Does that, I suspect that while they wouldn't want to admit it, might make them cover these situations differently. Mm-hmm. And how do you see the government response to that as appropriate or not appropriate or absent?
Yeah, this was a challenging moment, to be frank, in my career. Few times have I cried in the field. And, I've been pushed around in the field many times, going back to the Occupy Seattle days when I was a radio reporter. I have been a non-favorite of the protest crowd in Seattle for a very long time. So it's certainly not the only time I've been mobbed. You'll remember a week before that happened to me at CHOP, my security guard disarmed 2 riders of stolen police rifles during the riot downtown. That made us a target. We were mobbed out after that, which is something that wasn't caught on camera, but it was significant. That was a really scary moment. And one of the reasons was because my photographer was 25 years old, newly married. And so I felt this profound sense of responsibility for making sure that he made it out of the situation safely as well. And he was looking at me with these just deer in headlight eyes. And I'm just like, oh my God. We have had a worsening situation in Seattle in the media when it comes to being attacked at demonstrations. One of the things that bothers me is the varying way that even the media itself treats it if you're attacked by a right-winger versus an anarchist. Down at the Capitol in Olympia, there was a crazy dude out there who I think pepper sprayed some in the media corps down there, and there was headlines about it and all of these things. When I was attacked up at CHOP, do you think that there was any headlines about poor blonde Fox News lady? No. In fact, one of the city council members had tweeted out, No one deserves to be treated like that. And then she got so much pressure to delete it for coming to my defense that she ended up deleting it. And so it's just this fascinating thing for me. And I go back to, again, actions before affiliation. I don't care what fringe you're part of. The media, they have to be off limits, and elected leaders have to come to it in the same way. There was such an outcry from electeds on the left about what was happening at the state capitol. But when reporters were getting assaulted on a daily basis in the protests in Seattle, the Seattle City Council did nothing, said nothing. And so their handling of that was so deeply disappointing. And I had phone calls after the fact with some Seattle council members who, were willing to call me, off the record and all that, but not to say anything publicly, which was deeply disappointing. And all it does is it makes that behavior acceptable. And that's really, really disappointing. I believe that we can be critical of the media. I'm critical of my colleagues in the press as well. And I'm certainly not perfect. But I think there's a difference between being critical and taking that to a level like the former president did, which I think begets issues and violence.
Well, Brandi, I really appreciate you coming on today, as do all of us from Washington Policy Center. I'm very excited about your new endeavors, the Twice a Week podcast, wherever you're subscribing to your podcast, you can subscribe to Brandi's as well. And also the YouTube series. We have the link to that on our resources page at washingtonpolicy.org. Thanks so much for sharing your experience and your views.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you guys having me. And let's go out there and give common sense a comeback. That's my new tagline. Yes.
And good luck with the high-centered car, too. I know you got to go dig some snow. So
I had forgotten about that, but now I remember. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Now let's wrap things up with day one of Solution Summit with Paul Guppy, our Vice President for Research and Interim President. Paul?
I think, Dave, Paul stepped away for a moment, so I think you and I can wrap things up as we get, oh, there he is, he's back.
He's back in action. Or is
your mic is off, Paul. Paul, your mic is off.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, guys. I'm kind of here. We try to run a professional operation. I'm missing my cue. And you can see I'm a little dressed down here during our lunch event. So that was a great presentation from Brandi Kruse, and we really appreciate it. We also appreciate everybody's attendance today. We hope that you found the sessions to be interesting and informative. And in fact, I will pick up on exactly what Brandi was talking about. And this is one reason we were excited to have her as our lunchtime speaker, is this openness to respect other people's ideas, to respect opinions, to listen to what others have to say. And then, of course, we feel that that is the best way to arrive at the truth, to arrive at an idea of what's really going on in our country, and in our state. So I thought that was an excellent presentation by her, and I really appreciate her professionalism and the way that she approaches the news. And I think if we had more of that in our state, the public would be better informed. We would have better public policy. But of course, we at the Washington Policy Center will continue to urge that. So I thank you very much for that. Dave, were there other points that you wanted me to cover? Because I kind of jumped on here kind of quick, but
you're good. I mean, we just have.
I just wanted to give a wrap up that we appreciate everybody attending. We hope you provided good information. Our website, washingtonpolicy.org, of course, has more information on our publications. And we're also just starting up washingtonvotes.org, which is our neutral website. Again, picking up on the kind of principles that Brandi talked about. WashingtonVotes.org tracks everything that happens in the legislature in a completely neutral way and allows people to make their own decision. So there, let me pass it back to you, Dave, and see if you had any other comments.
No, other than make sure, folks, you watch for your Zoom link for day two for tomorrow. And we look forward to having you all here and having another great session. And again, if you missed a session that you wanted to catch or you wanted to rewind something, we will have all of this available on our video channel on YouTube coming up, and we'll post that online as well. So thank you all for coming, and you guys all have a great rest of your afternoon.